On today's episode of Boundary Breakers, I sit down with Bill Wosilius. Bill is an Air Force Academy graduate where he played football and then spent 8 years in the Air Force before a successful career as an IT executive. Bill shares a fascinating and compelling story from a snot-nosed second lieutenant in the Air Force to a high-caliber CEO with a leading IT firm. If you enjoyed the Bobby Jones episode, I really think you're going to enjoy this one. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter and Clark. Just tell us a little bit about sort of your what I like to call your origin story.
Yeah.
You know, where you grew up, where you were born, siblings,
Sure.
that type of thing.
Yeah, I grew up an only child of two high school phys ed teachers.
Oh, wow.
So, a career without involving sports was not in my future. I think that was my fate was sealed pretty early. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, just across the border from Chicago. And as it turns out, my father, and I think Bobby and I share this background, my father played in the NFL back in the late 60s as well. And so when he was off at training camp, this was back when the St. Louis Cardinals, when the Cardinals were in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And so my mom, had me and raised me in Northwest Indiana where her family was. Like I said, they were both phys ed teachers. So I played growing up every sport you can imagine, better at some than others. But, I was pretty much, football in the fall, basketball and wrestling in the winter and track in the spring kind of guy. But, I grew up there and at the time the decision came to, where I was going to go to school and what I was going to do, ultimately landing me at the United States Air Force Academy. I originally I had no interest in that. I got recruited out of high school by all three military academies and a few Ivy League schools, which was an interesting proposition. I remember meeting with the folks from Princeton and Harvard, and I got all excited about that. And then they said at the time, and I think it's probably still this way, we don't give scholarships. And I went, okay, well, then how does this work? And they said, well, we give grants. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but the amount that I had to come up with on my own that wasn't covered by a grant made that not possible. So it was military academy or bust. But as it turned out, my father, in his NFL career and then post NFL, he was out of my life for many, many years and came back into my life my senior year in high school. And so when that decision came to where I was going to go to school, I got recruited by a small Division II school in Eastern Pennsylvania called Bloomsburg University. And I thought, man, there can't be a better place to go where my dad can see me play. Right. And that drove every decision, at that age, especially if you grew up without your dad around, you want to impress your dad. Right.
Yep.
And so, I said no to the Air Force Academy guys. I didn't really seriously consider the Naval Academy or West Point, because in that era, Air Force was dominant, and and so I know we'll come back and cover that. But at any rate, I said no to the Air Force Academy folks, and I went and played a year. Went to school for a year at Bloomsburg University, and about halfway through that year, I think I made a mistake, and I called Coach Rucker, who was my position coach, and I said, "Hey, I think I made a mistake. Can I still come do this?" And he said, "Yeah, absolutely." So I transferred into the Air Force Academy after a year away at school. It was probably the best thing that could have happened to me, because when I showed up at the Air Force Academy, I was a year older. I had lived on my own, kind of, for a year, and I was a little bit more mature. And, you've interviewed enough military academy folks that, that went straight out of high school. That's a tough transition. It's a tough transition
Absolutely.
for anybody, but even tougher if you're straight out of high school and your first experience is some upperclassman getting in your face and yelling at you. So,
yeah,
so that's how I landed there.
Gotcha. Was Fisher DeBerry?
He was my coach. He's my head coach. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So it's interesting. So, again, this is not about me, and I don't want to make it about me, but just you might find it interesting. So they wanted me to come play. Well, they asked me to come play. Coach DeBerry asked me to come play at Air Force, but they wanted me to go to prep school for a year. And to your point, it probably would have been fantastic, but I ended up at the Citadel instead. And so, I'm right there with you. It's very tough coming out of high school to do any of that stuff, but small world.
Well, so, as fate would have it, our paths, my position coach. So I initially came into the Air Force Academy as a defensive back, and my position coach was a guy named Cal McCombs. Who,
wow, you're kidding me!
A longtime Citadel coach, and
he coached me at the Citadel.
He did.
Yes. He wasn't my position. He was not my position coach, but he was on the staff my freshman year.
I love him, and he probably, he'd probably be smooth in your back pedal. He was I love that guy.
Wow.
So our paths did cross indirectly.
That's unbelievable, because now that I think about it, I'm 95% sure he had just come directly from the Air Force Academy. That would have been the fall of '98. So
yeah, I think that's right. I lost touch with him, and I feel bad about it. But he's, the older we get, we do a better job of keeping in touch with not only our teammates but our coaches, and we've reached out to him, and he's plugged in. So he's one of the sort of early foundational, him and a guy named Ken Rucker, Coach Rucker. It was after my freshman year, I moved into the other side of the ball. Instead of delivering the hits, I was taking them, and became a running back and played for Coach Rucker. But at any rate, I was, full disclosure, I was a career backup. So I played the majority of my career. I played behind an All-American fullback by the name of Rod Lewis, who just recently retired as a 2-star general. He still looks like he could play today. He hasn't, like some of us, put on weight in places that don't help you play football. But so I played a lot of special teams, and I played a lot of cleanup duty during my career there. But it was an interesting kind of aha moment, and this maybe transitions into a discussion about kind of leadership in the rest of life. There was a period of time there where the light bulb went on to me that I was kind of meant to do something bigger than myself. But I didn't have that when I first went. Like, I was highly motivated by playing Division I football, and this kind of gets to your Boundary Breakers topic title. I had a high school coach that told me I'd never play Division I football. I just wasn't good enough. And so that was a boundary that I was dead set on breaking. And frankly, I didn't get any other offers. So I went and did it at Air Force. But
I love it.
I got motivated by that early on in my career. And then about midway through the academy, that light bulb went off that I was, I wasn't as fortunate physically as my dad. My dad was 6'4", 260 pounds, and I got the short gene in my family. And so I knew I wasn't going to play at the next level regardless. And so I went, you know what, I'm meant to do something bigger than myself. And that was a cool kind of wake up moment. I don't know whether, others have talked about that, but I didn't come in. I wasn't that kid that straight out of high school knew that he wanted to serve in the military. I kind of evolved into that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What position did your dad play in the NFL?
My dad was an outside linebacker. He was a 376th, I think I had that right, 376th pick back when they had a lot more rounds than they do today. I think it's 7th round, something like that, 8th round. It was late.
Yeah.
But he played outside
he was drafted
linebacker for the Cardinals for a couple of years. He blew his knee out, rehabbed, and came back and played for the Bengals for a year, and then his career was over. So he was a pretty typical story.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Well, so I'm curious, with your experience at the Air Force Academy, did you enjoy? So when you first got there, obviously, it's not necessarily the most fun place to be,
No.
right? But there's a. Tell us about, did you want to quit? Did you understand? I mean, what were your thoughts back then when you first entered, before you got to this point where you realized, wait a minute, there's a world bigger than myself?
Yeah. No, I never considered quitting. There were a few moments where that decision almost got made for me. But and one of those, a funny story. I'm the one class that and my teammates all joke about this because I was not a strong swimmer, and we had to pass a water survival class as part of the graduation requirement, and it was you had to jump off the 10-meter platform into the deep end of the pool. You did it in full battle dress uniform, so you had to take your bottoms off, tie the legs in a knot, wave them over your head, and make a makeshift life preserver. And then you had to swim underwater, under the bulkhead, which I think in Olympic pool is 50 meters, something like that.
Yeah.
And then you had to swim to the other end of the pool and in a certain amount of time. I think it was like 2 minutes. And, I'm swimming for my life, trying not to drown and pass the class. And I touched the wall at like 1:59. So there were a few moments like that, but I did pretty well. Academically, I wasn't the smartest kid coming out of high school. Probably by their standards today, I probably would never get even admitted to any of the military academies. But I was good at managing a lot of stuff, prioritizing, what's important, managing my time, spending my time, where it needed to be spent. And so I never really had any thoughts of quitting. To your first question, it's not, those are, as those experiences aren't enjoyable. But there are parts of it, the older we get and the further away from that experience that you look back on, it's kind of like having kids. The longer you go, the more sense it makes to have another one, because you forget about all the hard stuff.
Right.
And so, looking back on it, boy, it was foundational for me. I grew up, as I mentioned, an only child and in a somewhat of a broken family, and that brotherhood that I developed while I was there, just it exists to this day. I'm recently remarried in the last couple of years, and that came 35 years after I graduated, and the audience was 90% my wife's family and friends, and I had 11 people there, and 9 of them were Air Force football teammates. So,
oh wow,
it just like that made it all worth it. I got a family out of that experience.
Wow, I love that. I'm curious about your experience on the leadership side of things while at Air Force. I mean, you obviously went on to have a very successful career and demonstrated remarkable leadership skill, which we'll get to later in the discussion. But I've had some really interesting discussions about military schools and the experience that people have there. Some of them have a sort of a foundational sort of leadership aha experience where like I did, where I was put in charge of 200 other cadets and put in situations that no 20-year-old kid, could get elsewhere, but others, whether it's sort of luck of the draw or just based on, what they were exposed to, others, mentioned how, it's not really real world, the maybe a sour experience. I'll say. I'm curious. Do you feel like that at the Air Force, like the lessons that you learned at the Air Force Academy were helpful or were foundational in your career as it progressed, or was it more of a non-leadership growth that you were doing while you were there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's probably more the latter. I didn't view it as, well, certainly looking back on it, it was a leadership laboratory. You got to,
right,
experiment with some things and figure out what worked and what didn't, but it didn't really prepare me for what the real world, the real Air Force was going to be like. Primarily because we didn't get exposed, at least back when I was there, we didn't get exposed to the enlisted force a lot, not much at all, actually. And so you didn't really get that until you got out to your first active duty assignment. And that was a culture shock for me. Fortunately, and I'll talk a little bit about this later when we get into the 8 leadership lessons, I did okay with that because I kept my wits about me. I didn't believe the hype that a lot of us were, all of us were told. It was real easy. There's a reason why academy grads get the reputation that they get. Is sometimes they end up believing the hype about what they're told about. You're the best of the best, and whatever it was, 14,000 applicants, and 1,000 of you will graduate, and all that sort of stuff. I just didn't believe the hype. I knew I put my pants on the same way everybody else did, and so I didn't believe any of that. But to answer your question, I didn't really get a whole lot of that at the academy that I can put my finger on, but I sure got it.
Yeah.
My first active duty assignment after graduation. So, maybe that was me prioritizing, the things that, there's only so many hours in the day. And
sure,
when intercollegiate athletics takes up, 6 or 7 of those, and, studying takes up the other, waking hours, at some point,
right.
I was not the greatest cadet. As you may know, they measure, as 3 pillars, right? It's athletics, academics, and military. And I was only really good at 2 out of the 3 of those. So,
Gotcha.
If I was playing baseball, I'd be in the Hall of Fame, but I was not a great cadet.
Gotcha. Well, all right. That's fascinating. And one of these days I may try to get all the different military school graduates together and talk about some of these commonalities, because it's fascinating to me. But all right, so here you are, a newly minted second lieutenant in the Air Force, received your commission.
Yep.
Talk to us about what that was like with your first assignment.
Well, in order to tell that story, I have to actually go back a little bit.
Perfect.
So I went to high school in the mid 80s, and anybody who grew up at that time and, watched the original Top Gun, and all of us that went to a military academy, either Navy or Air Force, wanted to fly jets. And that was my dream. I wanted to be a fighter pilot, just like Tom Cruise. And at the time, that was highly likely. The vast majority of graduates went on to fly airplanes. Well, my junior year, at the academy playing football, we played a game at Northwestern in Chicago, and back then they gave us 2 tickets to give to our family and friends, and if you didn't have anybody come into the game, you could give yours to a teammate. And all the guys from California and Florida and Texas that didn't have anybody at the Northwestern game gave their tickets to me. So I had like 40 people at this game. And I got knocked out cold on the opening kickoff. So
Oh, wow.
my parents were still at the hot dog stand. They didn't even see it happen. They came to their seats, and I'm sitting on the sidelines looking out of my ear hole in my helmet and, smelling salts. And so the punchline there is that put an end to my pilot career. Apparently losing consciousness is not good for flying jets, and I can understand that, but I was pretty devastated at the time. And so I went through this process of, well, okay, if I can't fly them, then I want to go and I want to be close to them. So I chose aircraft maintenance as my career field. And that's exactly what I ended up doing. I came out of graduation after a short, what they call tech school, where they teach you how to do the job that you picked. And my first assignment was at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, Alaska. And,
Wow.
I was, that was, for me, that was big adventure. I wanted to, I loved that opportunity. I was a big outdoors kind of kid, and I loved the hunting and fishing and all of that kind of stuff that went with it. But I showed up as a brand new second lieutenant at my first permanent assignment in Alaska. And back then that was considered an overseas assignment, even though it was part of the U.S. They considered that an overseas assignment, I guess, because you can't just jump in your car and drive to your parents' house or something like that. But and they had never seen a second lieutenant. Like, that was very rare back then to send second lieutenants to a first assignment overseas. And so I felt a bit like an alien when I showed up, and everybody was kind of like, what is that? Got assigned to my first unit, and they had a master plan. They kind of rotate you through a lot of different units. So I started out as an F-15 C model maintainer, so the air-to-air version.
Okay.
Ended up spending a year or two there, and a little bit of time in the what they call the bomb dumps, the munitions portion of the job, and then ended up in a Strike Eagle squadron, so the air to ground variant of the F-15. And that's where I kind of learned my first of my 8 leadership lessons. And this one probably requires a little bit of explanation for your listeners that are not military. And that lesson was listen to your senior NCO. So the NCO is that senior NCO is that senior enlisted guy or gal that had spent 20, 25 years in the military, and they're the thing that makes the Air Force run. I'm sure all branches are similar in that regard. Well, one of their additional duties that they get assigned is kind of teaching young officers how to lead. And I didn't know that at the time, but looking back on it, I can see why, some of the assignments that I got, some of the units that I was assigned to, the reason they chose those, because they had strong senior NCO leaders that would mentor me and help me. And I guess either fortunately or just through dumb luck, I listened to the senior NCOs. I learned it the hard way. Unfortunately, I was after a couple of years, I thought I had earned my stripes, and I don't even remember what the decision was, but I made some decision without checking with him. It was a guy named Chief Master Sergeant Mike Hyatt, Pappy Hyatt. And I made a decision without talking to him, and he came to me and said, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." And he did it exactly how I told him, and he made sure that it failed. And I don't even remember what it was. It was something insignificant, but he taught me a lesson that, I should probably, talk to the people that, that are part of my team before I go off thinking I know everything. And so that lesson of listening to your senior NCO was probably one of the first and foundational. I use it today. Any new organization I go into, the first question I always ask is, who is the person that kind of makes this business run. Who do I need to talk to that knows where all of the dead bodies are buried and where all the problems are, and that's just now something that I do, naturally, but I had to learn it the hard way.
Yeah. No, I love that story. And for any listeners that may not be as sort of read up on how the military works, that one of the unique features of the military that causes this scenario, I guess is the best way to put it, is you've got enlisted folks, and then you have you have officers, and so there can be enlisted folks that have been on a job they could have been in there for 25 or 30 years. Like a chief master sergeant is an extraordinarily experienced enlisted individual, and then you have the officer corps where, on paper, the enlisted folks have to salute the officers. They are subordinate in theory to the officers, and so what that ends up creating is a scenario where you got somebody, you may have a 55-year-old man or woman that have been doing a job for their entire career, know everything there is to know, and a 22, 23-year-old snot-nosed kid shows up with a second lieutenant insignia on and expects to get saluted, and they tell these kids that they're the boss. And so I think that this is a unbelievable insight and lesson that you shared.
Well, it works whether you're in the military or whether you're a CEO. It doesn't matter, right? Like, you're a CEO.
Agreed.
Your job is not to know everything about how the business runs. Your job as a CEO is, in my opinion, to do two things. It's to manage the culture of the organization and to mitigate risk. Ultimately, you're responsible for growth, and depending on the business that you're in, I think that one is in the top three of your responsibilities. But your job is not to know how everybody is supposed to do their job. You just can't. It's impossible. And so you need those senior NCOs to help you figure out, what's really going on in the organization. So it's not a uniquely military thing, but looking back on it, I learned that one real early on.
Yeah, no, that's a heck of a lesson. Isn't it fascinating how you've got, just like in the military and just like in business, you've got sort of a paper organizational chart that tells, who's in charge, whose boss is who. But then you've got sort of the kind of the OTJ chart, as I call it, right? Like, who are like you mentioned, who's the people that really run this business? And it's not always the same in terms of who has the most sway or authority.
That's right.
I'm curious, did you ever have a scenario militarily or in your business career where you struggled with senior NCO type, where it was tough to get along or tough to sort of find the boundaries?
No, it's a good question. I did have that with leaders that I reported to, but not the senior NCO types. I was either smart enough or just, I think I grew up kind of a blue collar guy. I sort of related with those folks better. I did not do well with officers who believed the hype about themselves, right? And so, and that doesn't, I don't know if that's good or bad, but the enlisted folks that I worked with when I was in the military did, they appreciated that because they knew that I wasn't just, I wasn't going to manage up. I was going to manage across, the organization, and that I would listen to them.
No, that's great. I bet I can't assume, but I would be willing to bet that your form of leadership and the way you approached it was probably a whole lot more effective than those that believed in the hype.
Well, it's interesting. Another senior NCO story, and I just recently, in the last 6-8 months, had dinner with another senior NCO, another chief. He came to town and called me and said, "Hey, let's get together for dinner." And you're familiar with the challenge coin? You know what that means? So for your listeners that don't know what that is, it's a sign of respect that, in the Air Force, one airman gives to another. And Chief Van Ray, he was my chief when I was in munitions, in the bomb dump side of my job. He gave me a coin 30 years ago that I still have. I brought it to dinner, and I put it on the table, and he forgot his. And so he had to buy the drinks, obviously. That's the penalty for not having your challenge coin. But he still to this day, and he's in his 70s, and he still to this day, for whatever reason, still keeps in touch with this snot-nosed second lieutenant that he inherited 30 years ago. And I take that as a sign of respect, right? He didn't have to do that. He was here for a funeral. One of his teammates had passed away, and he made time to have dinner with me. So I'd like to think I made a difference to those folks. I just like them. They are the salt, and it leads into sort of the second of my 8 lessons in leadership, which is to find a mentor, not just find one, but to invest time in your relationship with that mentor before you need something from them. I think we've all been in situations, you probably have, Brandon, where somebody calls you and it's when they need a job or where they need to borrow your truck to help them move or whatever it is. And you're like, how come I only hear from you when you need something? So part of the reason I believe in that finding a mentor and investing time is because they've been there and they've done that. They've done what you're doing now, and they've done it for many years. They probably have forgotten more than you'll ever know. And I just think that generation, has a lot to share, and we'd be wise to pay attention to them. And so, Chief Ray is one of those guys that was not only my senior NCO, but he was a mentor because he taught me how to lead.
Yeah. So that's amazing. And it says a lot about you and the impact that you must have had on him for 30 years later, him to remain in touch.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's really cool. Well, so you stayed in for 8 years, right?
I did. Yeah. So after, my tour in Alaska, which that was my base. Did a couple of deployments. I was on active duty in between the first Gulf War and 9/11. So that period of time, there wasn't a whole lot going on. But we did deploy in support of the skirmish in Bosnia. The operation was called Operation Deny Flight. It was enforcing the no-fly zone over Bosnia-Herzegovina in the mid-90s. Did some deployments over to South Korea. But at the end of the day, at the end of that assignment it was 96, I guess, I got picked up for the Air Force's version of graduate school. It's called the Air Force Institute of Technology. We call it AFIT. The Navy calls it Naval Postgraduate School. But it's effectively your master's program. So that was in Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Went there and did my master's for about 18 months. Had my first daughter at Wright-Pat. And at the time, it was like I was 2 years below the zone for major. It's like that point where you kind of got to go, I'm either going to make this a career or I'm going to transition into corporate America. And given what was going on in the world at the time, if I stayed in for a career, my next couple of assignments were going to be to the Pentagon or to a 1-year remote assignment without my family. And both of those were yuck. I didn't want to do that. Yeah. And so, as it turns out, I had a classmate, an academy classmate of mine that had started a data center business, technology business, based here in Denver, Colorado, where I live, and had raised a couple $100 million of venture capital and started building out data centers across the globe. And they recruited a bunch of us as general managers to come in and run that. Now, keep in mind, not a tech guy. I was not an engineer, although I took a fair bit of engineering classes at the academy. I didn't grow up with my fingers on a keyboard. And so when I ended up in this data center business, and when you think data center, think 100,000 square foot building of raised floor full of servers and network devices and storage devices, things like that. Looks like a giant air hockey table. Anyway, I had no idea what I got myself into. I'm an accidental IT guy by trade. That was late 90s. But they knew that they could drop us into a new market, new geographic market, and we would do whatever it took. It was like a deployment almost, right? We would do whatever it took to get that business up and running, hire the people, train the people, build a marketing plan to, kind of elbow our way into the market that we went into. And so I got the short straw, I thought at the time, to go open our Northeast region. And I moved to Pittsburgh, which, in the grand scheme of things was great because it's a great place to raise a family. I grew up a Steeler fan as a kid. And so it was kind of like I was in heaven. And so, I got my feet wet in the IT or in the technology sector when I made that transition from the military. There was actually a short stint that I had before I did that, but it's not relevant. Effectively, I've been an IT guy now for the better part of 25 years. And that was the first. Back then I thought a router took the edge off of a piece of wood, which is true, but it wasn't the kind that we were dealing with.
Gotcha. So help us understand a little bit more. You were the general manager for a data center. So you were essentially sort of the president of that location, if you will, for
that's fair,
lack of a better explanation.
Yeah, we had overall P&L responsibility for a given geography, a given market. We were in charge of both service delivery as well as sales and marketing. And then you had the corporate entity back in Denver that provided all those shared services that
Gotcha.
we didn't do. So, a couple of years doing that. Came back to corporate here in Denver in 2002. Stood up our centralized engineering function. So, built effectively what was shared services for all of those data centers globally. If you remember back at that time, that was the tech bubble burst, which was a challenging time because a lot of those companies were our customers, right? Those were the customers that needed data center services. So, and we were, private equity funded business. And so it was kind of my first lesson in, profitability matters.
Gotcha.
And so we had to live through some tough times there. We had, customers churning and we had layoffs, but we survived. We lived to fight another day. And then in the mid 2000s, we sold that business to SunGard Availability Services in 2005. So talk about culture shock. I went from small, nimble, VC funded kind of tech bubble kind of culture to large blue collar, or, not blue collar, but large kind of blue chip, publicly traded, kind of 1,600 employees and $4 billion in revenue, that culture. So the center of the universe shifted from Denver to Philadelphia. So I stuck around for a little bit, helped with the integration of those two businesses. That was the first experience that I had in kind of M&A integration, which, as it turned out later on in my career, became something that I've done a lot of. But, 18 months later, kind of figured out that I wasn't a big public company guy. That was not where I fit. And this leads me to one of my third of my 8 lessons in leadership, which is the best job you ever had is the one you have right now. And so the story there is I had a very good, solid leadership position within this large company at SunGard, but I had a chip on my shoulder. I felt like, I had earned, this is back, when I thought titles mattered. They don't. Nobody cares what your title is, but back then I did. And so I was chasing a VP title. And I chased a VP title. I got it. I got it somewhere else. Just so happens I got that in a business that was woefully underfunded, and within 6 months of being there was out of business. So that decision to chase that title and not, focus on the job at hand, but chase the shiny penny, blew up in my face. And it was another learning experience for me was, make sure that you're focused on the job that you have right now, because, if you view it as the best job you ever had, and you're not, your head is down looking at what you need to get done instead of looking for something else and taking your eye off the ball. I think that was a valuable lesson for me to learn.
Yeah, I love that one too. It took me a long time. To learn that one. I want to back you up a little bit because I think that there's some really interesting lessons in this first part of your career. So from a big picture perspective, you went from football player at the Air Force Academy to aircraft
maintenance,
to being in the IT world.
Yep.
And you mentioned earlier, several minutes ago, that about the job of a leader isn't necessarily to know how to actually run the business, but it's a bigger leadership exercise. And I think it's fascinating and speaks volumes that you went from, you had these very successful careers in these very different industries, but you saw success in each one and continued to grow and build. What do you attribute that to? I mean, how could you, it's basically sounds like you could have dropped you in any industry, in any country, and you would have flourished.
I don't know about that. I say I'm probably determination, not quit, is probably the biggest piece of that. I think, if I'm honest, I'm pretty good at diagnosing problems and figuring out what the real root of a problem is. I don't get hung up in the weeds. And I think all of those different organizations all have challenges that need to be overcome, and your ability to distill it down to its simplest form and go, okay, all of these things are going on, but this is the one that I need to solve or focus on. Is just, it drives my wife nuts because she wants me to hear out all of the gory details of it. We're in the process of a house sale right now, and I'm just focused on what size of a moving van we need, not the color we can paint the walls and where we're going to put stuff. So it drives her nuts. But I think it's true that, your ability to diagnose sort of what matters has a factor in your success. I don't know if you've had similar experience in your business, but we just, as CEOs, we have so much noise that we have to deal with, that you have to have a good filter for how to distill it down to what really matters.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I also, something that I find really interesting that's really doing these interviews has really opened my eyes, to a lot of these things. But what fascinates me is I think people often get hung up on, thinking about something like aircraft maintenance I don't know anything about aircraft maintenance or IT. I don't know anything about IT. And the more experience I have, the longer I live, or the longer my career is in business, the more obvious it becomes to me that business is just people.
Yeah. That's right.
It is dealing with people. And at the end of the day, if you're making widgets, or if you are supporting aircraft, or if you are running a data center,
That's right.
yes, there are little details and nuances and things, but what's clear to me, talking to you, is that you're a natural born leader, and you instinctually understand that you've got to win over your senior NCO because they're really the ones that are making it happen. And I just think it's a sort of a case study in exactly this, that you, as a natural born leader with the instincts of leading others, doesn't matter if it's IT or if it's aircraft maintenance or on the football team. You'll learn that stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting. It made me think of something I skipped over back when I was talking about the Find a Mentor. One of my mentors was a guy named John Kelly, former senior executive at Quest, the telecommunications company, CEO of a company called McData, board member at Polycom, very, very successful guy. And he's local Denver here, which is how I got to meet him. But one of the things he taught me was this art of connection. I'm inherently an introvert, believe it or not. I don't. It doesn't come easily to me to interact with people, especially in public settings. And one of the things he taught me was the art of connection, getting to know you. You mentioned this is relationships and building those relationships with other people, because they're the folks that are actually going to get the job done. It's not you.
Yeah.
And so, he was super impactful in, teaching me, 5 questions that you can ask anybody that'll get a conversation going. And, the benefit is you're not the one doing the talking, they're doing the talking. But you learn things about those folks that matter to them. And if I don't know if you do this, but I'm old school. I got about 50 of these. That I just take little notes in. I think today most people replace it with that.
Yeah.
But those are the kinds of things that I write down. I try to remember people's spouses' names and their kids' names and where their kids are going to school and things that that help you connect with them on a human level, such that when it comes time to make sound business decisions, they're not wondering whether you've got their back or not.
Yeah. No, that's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. Okay, so you thought that the grass may have been a little bit greener somewhere else with a VP title, and you ended up sort of being the dog that caught the car.
I did. That's a good one. Can I borrow that?
Of course. I borrowed it from somebody, so you.
I like that
keep
one.
It going.
Yeah, I caught the car and the car ran over me.
Yeah.
So, it was okay. I had accumulated enough sort of body of work as a professional at that point that I was able to, string together a year or so of consulting engagements from people that I had worked with or for. But ultimately landed at a business about a year later called Health Grades. Sort of a it's a healthcare focused business, but it's really a data business. It's a data about the quality of care provided by hospitals and physicians, and very analytical business. As fate would have it, I ended up there because my CEO at Inflow, that data center business that I talked about earlier, he was friends with the CEO of Health Grades at the time, a guy named Carrie Hicks. And so I ended up there, ran the data operations part of that business, which was the procurement of all of this data, this healthcare data. And it's another kind of parachute into another unfamiliar environment, figure out what matters, kind of like we were just talking about. I didn't know anything about healthcare, but I did understand a thing or two about how data interacts with it itself. And I understood how to monetize that data. That the business model at Health Grades at the time was to present healthcare quality data to consumers like you and I, such that they can make better healthcare informed decisions. How do people normally make decisions about who they go to see? Their mother or their
ask somebody,
their uncle, or their neighbor said, Dr. So-and-so is really good. But most people don't investigate that physician or that facility to the level that they would if they were buying a car or a new refrigerator, right? Like there's all kinds of data about that. And so the vision was, to inform better healthcare decisions by putting that information about the quality of care into the hands of the consumer. And I was in charge of all of the sources and uses of that data, making sure that all of our products that we sold had a high degree of quality and dependability.
Gotcha.
So, it was my one departure. Of most of my career has been spent in private equity held businesses. That was a period of time where it wasn't, and I, after a few years there, I went, you know what? I think my roots are in IT. I'm going to go back to that.
Okay.
But nonetheless, I think it was a good experience for me. I got a little visibility outside of the IT, vertical. But it was yet another kind of part of my career that was different than the last one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's interesting. So what was your next stop after Health Grades? Which, by the way, just as a quick aside, I think that industry or that strategy is really fascinating. I could have a whole hour discussion on that because just the way that we in this country, we don't buy healthcare like we buy anything else that we consume, and it is the most important thing that we do buy, right? So it just blows my mind that people are willing to read 343 Google reviews about the restaurant that they're going to go to on Friday. But they're like, oh yeah, go see Dr. Will. Dr. Smith is a great heart surgeon.
He's such a nice guy. And I don't really care if he's a nice guy. I just want to know if he's a good doctor.
Right. And it's,
I'm a data geek by nature, right? So I'm a fairly analytical guy, and that just made sense to me, right? Making informed decisions, whether you're buying a car or, a refrigerator or whatever, or healthcare, you want as much data to make that decision as possible. And so, you ask my wife again, there's not much I do in life without the aid of a spreadsheet. And so, I think that data-driven decision-making plays over into my personal life more than it should. But yeah, that Health Grades experience was really good from that perspective. But I eventually went back to my roots in IT. And so I went to a managed IT services business called Critigen. It had been a portion of a larger organization called CH2M Hill. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
Maybe with your industry, you probably have large kind of capital improvement projects and things like that. But they had owned a managed IT services business as part of CH2M Hill that managed all the IT infrastructure at these large capital improvement projects that they would do. Stand up the IT infrastructure so that the people that worked on those project sites could do their jobs. And eventually, though, that business carved out and became Critigen. Private equity firm bought that and carved it out. Golden Gate Capital carved that out, and so we said, we want to do this for more than just CH2M Hill customers on projects, and so we did that. And And so, that was a $25-30 million a year business, still relatively small. And my first lesson in what can happen if you get sideways with a private equity sponsor. So the executive team that brought me in found themselves doing something else for a living fairly quickly. And it was a bit like, musical chairs, and the music stops and you hope you have a chair to sit down in. And I did, but boy, it got me, it was a real eye opener, right? The difference in vision and difference in, philosophy and all of that sort of stuff. When you're a private equity held business, you got to remember that your job as an executive in a private equity held business is to create and return shareholder value. Number one, it's not to create jobs. It's not to make happy customers. It's not, all those things are sort of leading indicators of it. But at the end of the day, the folks that wrote the check to buy the business get to make the call, as they should. Yep. And so, as fate would have it, another opportunity came along with another person that I had worked with in the past. And I went on to a publicly held data center business called CoreSite. I had actually gone to the academy with the leader of sales at CoreSite, and then I had worked with him at Inflow. So we had multiple points of history, and they needed a CIO. And so, first kind of experience at the table, as we say, and probably another example of still being at the time and kind of infatuated with the role and the title.
Gotcha.
And, I will come back to this, but I have an acronym that I use that may be useful to your readers or your listeners. It's called FORMS, FORMS, F being financial, right? What's your salary? What's your bonus? What's your equity play? O is the organization. What do they do? Are they a data center business, or do they make shoelaces? R is the role, the responsibility of the role. Do you have a seat at the table? Do you have a C-level title, et cetera? M is the management style of the person that you're working for. And then S is strategy. What's the business strategy? Is it a private equity, flip? Is it a, carve the business up in pieces and sell it for piece parts? What's the strategy? So the reason I bring that up is the R, the role and responsibility, used to mean a whole lot more to me then than it does now. And as my career shifted over the years, the M has become all too important, whether that is the management style of the private equity firm that you work for as the CEO, or if you're not the CEO, and you work for the CEO, what's their management style? Are they hands off? Are they in the weeds? Are they micromanager? That today, because I'm old and just, living a life where I go to work and I'm frustrated, it's just not interesting to me anymore. Doesn't matter how much money you pay me or what title you give me. If I don't have that strong relationship, it's not going to work. But at the time I went to CoreSite, I was still chasing the R, the role and the title. And so I got my first C-level title. And so, that was, looking back on it, was very formative in my career. It's the first time I ever got fired. So this is an interesting part that nobody ever wants to talk about, but
let's dig into that.
Yeah, I looking back on it, I don't blame them one bit. But my job as the CIO at CoreSite was it was a business that had grown through acquisition. So they bought a bunch of data centers all over the country, and had all of these disparate systems, IT systems that they used. And so it needed to operate as a single platform. And I was given the mission to unify all of those systems and make it operate like a single a single business from an IT systems perspective. And so I'd had, quite a bit of experience with that in my past. So I was confident that I could figure that out. But the one piece that I didn't figure out until it was too late was your ability to get a technology transformation project like that done requires more than just your knowledge of those systems and how they work and how to interconnect them. You have these people in the business that have to use those systems, and they have opinions about how that should look. And if you do that in a vacuum, and frankly, your customers, which would be the employees, are not too happy about it, eventually that impacts your ability to get your job done, right? And so,
Yeah.
I didn't do a very good job of that, looking back on it, but and ultimately, we decided to part ways, and that was it was a wake up call.
Yeah.
But again, everything that's happened to me, whether it's been good or bad, it doesn't matter. Is a learning opportunity, right? There's something for me to take away from that, and I'm sure your other guests have talked about that, right? You can either get down in the dumps and woe is me and oh my gosh, my career is over, or you can go, okay, well that didn't work out too well,
right? Right. Well, no, look, yeah, absolutely, and folks like you that are confident, but yet humble. They understand. I think that the biggest blessings that we have are often failures at the time, right? Or what it feels like is a catastrophe.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I mean, it sounds like it wasn't exactly an enjoyable time, but that you may have learned a lot from that. And I think that is a really interesting or insightful story, the way that you told it, right? We talk a lot about how easy it is to lose sight of sort of the world from the customer's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in my experience, what happens so often with growing businesses is that instead of making decisions based on how it's going to be received or impacted or used by the customer, it starts to become what's the easiest or best thing for us, right? Like how could we make this a little bit better based on how we interact with it? And it sounds like in your scenario, even though the customer wasn't the customer, but in your seat, the customer was the employees. And sounds to me like you were wildly successful at the task that you were given, which was to integrate all of those things, but that I guess that, like they say, sometimes the enemy it always has a vote, right?
Yep.
The customers had a vote. So
win the battle, not the war. Yeah, it absolutely is the case. And you're right. I think I lost sight of who my customers were. I sort of believed this is why it was a really impactful thing, because up to that point, I had never believed the hype about myself. And I think I let that happen a little bit. I'm the CIO. I know better, right? I know how to do this. And it requires a degree of finesse, and it requires a degree of customer focus that you may have lost sight of, Bill. So here's your.
Well, you're being hard. You're being very humble, being very hard on yourself. It's easy to sit here and say, "Oh yeah, we just got to keep sight of the customer." It's a very difficult thing to do. Very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So
it is, but that's that's the part of these stories that nobody ever wants to tell. They all want to talk about how great they are and how things have gone well for them. But if you don't have a few skinned knees, and this is kind of the impetus behind the newest venture with Latitude 40 Leadership, where a lot of these life lessons, I'm like, you know what? If I can save somebody the skinned knees or the loss of their hair and teach them the things that I wish I had known 25 years ago, that might be a good use of my time. But nobody ever talks about when things don't go right. And fortunately for me, it wasn't the scarlet letter. It wasn't the end of my career. It was a solid learning experience. I got an opportunity shortly thereafter to do some work for a guy who is now a very good friend of mine, a guy named Dan Burns, who was the CEO of Optiv Security. At the time, it wasn't known as Optiv. It was this was 2014-ish. The business that Dan Burns had founded was a company called Accuvant. It's a cybersecurity business based here in Denver, about $750 million a year business. Very, very, one of two, call it 800-pound gorillas in the space. The other being a company based out of Kansas City called Fishnet Security. And our friends at Blackstone realized the value of maybe putting 2 plus 2 together and getting 5. And so Blackstone bought Accuvant, shortly thereafter bought Fishnet, put them together to create Optiv. And so I was doing some work for Dan Burns on the Accuvant side when the Blackstone acquisition happened, and ironically, in this kind of umbrella of customer service, right? They thought they had a service delivery quality problem, and that was why they weren't selling more services. The business was, if you're familiar with the term VAR, value added reseller. So you're selling a lot of technology, a lot of hardware, software, but from a private equity perspective, the services, higher margin services, are more valuable. And so, they did some services at the time, thought it was a customer service problem. Turns out it was a sales confidence problem, not a service delivery problem. But that's how I got my foot in the door there. I was doing some work for Dan Burns, and all of a sudden I found myself in the middle of a $1.5 billion a year security, the security, technology and services business, and then they asked me to stick around and run our technology services line of business, which at the time was about a $50 million a year revenue stream, and so I got to apply the whole mergers and acquisitions integration playbook again. I led the services integration between Accuvant and Fishnet, and taking the best of both businesses, putting it together into unified front. And I had a very, very long, successful, almost 6-year run at Optiv. And, we can come back and touch on that, but ultimately the story ends in 2019 when I got the phone call to be a first-time CEO at Nexus Tech. And so if it wasn't for that, I'd probably still be there and enjoying the world of cyber. It's exciting, and, it's all too important in today's business environment. The threats are getting more complex, not less. And, but nonetheless, that's kind of how I ended up in the CEO seat. So it's a sort of a indirect journey to get there, but in a period of, call it 6-7 years, I went from unemployed CIO to CEO, which.
Yeah. And I love that. And one of the questions that I get more than I ever thought I would, whether it's some of the younger employees at my firm or just other people that they say, I want to be a CEO. What's the roadmap? How do I become a CEO? And I always chuckle and say, I have yet to hear of a single person that has followed a roadmap. It is, and it goes to your point about the best job that you ever have is the one you have right now. My personal thought is, you look how do you become a CEO? You do the best job you possibly can with the role that you have right now, and then you'll get recognized. But I love that you share. I love that you shared each step, because I think that is an honest, realistic view into the journey of what it takes to become a CEO. But Tell us about, so when you got that call to become CEO, tell us about that.
Well, first off, anybody that tells you they want to be a CEO has never been one before. So,
Amen.
I don't know.
Amen.
I don't know why anybody would want to work that hard and subject themselves. I had hair when I first became CEO. It's not true, but so I got that call, and it came from a private equity firm that I had done some work when I was in between jobs. As an operating advisor years ago. This was in the late 2000s. I had done some work for Abry Partners as an operating advisor on another portfolio company that they owned at the time. And so, I knew them, they knew me. There was a level of familiarity. And I also understood the business that they needed a CEO for, because it was a managed IT services, cybersecurity services business. So it fit right in my strike zone. It just happened to be headquartered in Denver, which is probably part of the reason why I got a phone call as well, as I was convenient.
Yeah.
But I'm like, at that point, who wouldn't want that opportunity? I wanted to test myself. Again, I go back to, my high school coach told me I'd never played Division I college football. My entire life, I had a chip on my shoulder to try and prove everybody wrong. In the inside of I'm not wearing it right now because it's a knuckle crusher, but my academy ring, inside the inscription of it, is exceeding expectations. And I've had that chip ever since I was little. I always wanted to prove people wrong and challenge myself in maybe ways that some would say are stupid, but who wouldn't want to take that opportunity?
Yeah. Well, look, I got to tell you, Bill, that it gave me chills thinking about that, because on the inside of my Citadel ring, which I can't wear it either because it's so big, but I
you got to put it on my keychain. That's good. I never thought of that.
Inside my Citadel ring, it says it's TATWDM, and it's to all those who doubted me.
I love it. I love it.
And it's the exact
same motivation.
Exact same message.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And that's not to say that I had people that told me that I couldn't do it every day, but the motivation of, there are people that are like, ooh, yeah, I don't know that he could do that. Or in your case, you had somebody tell you couldn't. Yep. So there had to be something validating in getting that phone call.
Yeah.
After all that you had done, and you had a very successful tenure there.
Yep.
What was there anything about that particular experience that you were surprised by, or that a lesson that you learned while you were there that you reflect on now?
Yeah, it's funny. Right before I took the job, I sat down with Dan Burns, who was the CEO at Optiv, and I said, okay, first time CEO, what do I need to know? Tell me all the secrets, They whipped out my pen and my book, and I took copious notes. And then a year after I was in the seat, I went and had dinner with Dan. I was like, you lied to me. Like, everything you told me didn't happen, and all this other stuff happened. So there was a lot of stuff that I was unprepared for, that I'd never seen before. None probably more obvious than something that now we look back on and we go, oh yeah, everybody went through it, was managing through a global pandemic. I'd been in the seat 6 months. 6 months, and all of a sudden we had to go, hold on a second. We have to completely change how we're running this business to accommodate this pesky little virus. And it turned out it was very positive for us at Nexus Tech, because we had to help our customers figure out how to navigate from working in a corporate office behind a corporate firewall on all of these secure systems to now working out of their spare bedroom on, maybe on a home machine. And so it was actually a blessing in disguise for us, but that was a big one. Nexus Tech is a M&A roll-up of now 8 acquired businesses. So 6 of those had been acquired right before my arrival. 2 more that we did after. And so that's when I really got the chance to, because, when you're in charge, you actually get to make some of those decisions, and got to really do M&A integration work at a tactical level, and putting 6 businesses at the time together and getting them to act like one is a bit like trying to get the Hatfields and the McCoys to play nice together. And I think everybody wants to, it's a bit like a junior high school dance. The boys are on this side, the girls are on that side. They don't want to talk to each other, and it was like that. It was a very tribal culture when I arrived amongst these 6 businesses that had been acquired, and getting everybody to row the boat in the same direction is a challenge. Getting everybody to give up their whatever hat they wore prior to being acquired to wearing the new hat. And I will accelerate this because I know we've been at this a while, but part of that was building a solid leadership team that believed in what we were doing, and frankly, getting rid of those that didn't. And it sounds harsh, but another one of my leadership lessons is you are what you tolerate. And so if you have leaders that are, telling you yes, and then going and telling their team, oh, now that crazy CEO that they just hired is, full of it, and we got to do this because he said so. Those folks, they need to pursue excellence elsewhere. But on the positive side of that, I created a program, leadership development program called Nexus Tech Leadership Academy, which at its foundation is really kind of the genesis behind Latitude 40 leadership. It's teaching those leaders the things that nobody ever teaches, and you only learn through experience. And I wish somebody had showed me, how some of this stuff works 25 years ago. Maybe I wouldn't be as good of a leader as I am today, because some of that learning happens when you skin your knees. But
yeah,
boy, just making sense of some of the decisions that were made 25 years ago. God, it's like, now I get it, right? So, part of unifying that 6-headed, acquisition model was thinning the herd from a leadership perspective for people that weren't on board with that. And that's fine, right? Like, there's no, judgment upon those folks. It's just, we're not that company anymore. We're moving this direction. We're going to be a bigger company, a different company. And if you don't want to be a part of that, that's fine. But then taking the ones that you do have and investing heavily in them and teaching them not only how to manage, that's easy, right? How to hire people and fire people and all the stuff that goes into that. I got to be careful. My wife is a chief people officer, so I don't mean to minimize how hard that is. But leadership, in my opinion, is so much different. And so it is what is the genesis today for Latitude 40 leadership, which is based on this premise that there are things that leaders in business need to know. They don't get taught. Businesses are happy to invest in sending their engineers to a technical training, or their salespeople to Challenger or some other sales methodology training, but they don't do anything for their leaders. And it's everything from how to read a financial statement, an income statement or a balance sheet, to self-awareness, using a tool called the Enneagram, teaching you here's how you're wired as a human being, and here's how you show up as a leader to your people. And if you continue doing what you're doing, you're not going to be a very effective leader because you're not self-aware. So we teach all kinds of stuff, everything from those kinds of topics to, how to do mergers and acquisitions, how to integrate those businesses, data-driven decision-making. There's all kinds of topics that go into that, but that was kind of instrumental in getting all of Nexus Tech to operate and look like a single business as opposed to 6 acquired businesses.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So Latitude 40, is it fair to say that it's sort of the product of all the things that you learned through your career that you wish you were taught, but you had to learn the hard way?
That's right. Yeah, it's and we've developed a curriculum for kind of first-time leaders, first-time managers that are struggling with the basics. Got kind of a master's level for executives that their next job is going to be a C-level type of role. And those skills are different, right? The game changes when, as you probably have learned, it changes when you go from leader to executive leader. And now you have to deal with things that are private equity driven or shareholder driven. Maybe we should say not all businesses, are private equity held, but so we have different curriculum there. But yeah, it's all based on kind of all this body of work and the 8 lessons and the things that I think people need to know, because I've had graduates. We put in 5 years of doing that, we put almost 100 people through that program. And, the anecdotal feedback is just the most rewarding part of my job. When somebody comes to me and says, hey, you taught me something, years and years ago, and today, I'm successful, and I give you some degree of credit for that. That's why I do this. I don't enjoy being a CEO for any other reason than that, right? The other stuff is just not as fun.
Right. So who's your target customer? So is it a business like mine that would send their managers, leaders, executives through one of the courses?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not, we don't target the individual because it's tough for a lot of people to pay, for that kind of investment. It's a 12-month program, by the way. So it kind of mimics an executive MBA style of a curriculum, right? A topic per month, a 3-hour session per month, and then a final and final project and all of that. So it's a big time investment, and it's easier to target a business that wants to invest in its leaders. That investment for a business of a reasonable size. I don't know how big your business is, but a business that would invest in maybe building a leadership or a learning and development team as part of HR or something like that. But it's really, incumbent upon the leaders of of our target customers to go, leadership is important. We're going to invest in it. We're going to teach our leaders the skills that they need to be effective. And we don't really have the time, expertise, or focus to do it ourselves. It's kind of the model.
Gotcha. No, that's interesting. Well, so for business owners or other CEOs or executives that are interested in learning more about this program, where do we send them? Where do they go?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's latitude40leadership.com.
Latitude40leadership.com.
Yep. It got that name because my wife, as I mentioned, is a chief people officer. Very much the human side of executive leadership. I'm very much the data-driven, investor relations kind of guy, and we come at this from different perspectives. But we both grew up. She grew up in Hawaii. I grew up being metaphorically, but I grew up as an adult in Anchorage, Alaska, and so 60 degrees of latitude minus 20 is 40. So it's really based on our differences and how we approach executive leadership. But and as fate would have it, 40 degrees of latitude is Boulder, Colorado, which is like 20 minutes that way. So it works out.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, that is fascinating. And there's about 1,000 other questions I'd love to ask you, but I also got to be really respectful of your time. You've given me so much of it, and I'm very appreciative. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you were hoping that we would get to, or hoping that we would talk about that we haven't yet?
Yeah. Let's see. The 8 lessons, right? We talked about find a mentor, trust your senior NCO. Best job you ever had is the one that you have today. Number 4, we mentioned briefly, is you are what you tolerate, right? So if you tolerate bad behavior. Number 5, 3 things are certain in life: death, taxes, and people will quit. So don't be afraid of making tough decisions just because you're afraid that somebody might quit. Golly, and now I'm sitting here and I haven't gotten to the 7th or 8th ones because, frankly, I haven't had a forum to be able to talk about them. But I'll say this: if you decide to, talk a little bit further about leadership development, that we talk about these things, pretty regularly. But the list changes. It may end up being 9 or 10. It may end up being 5 or 6. Kind of as time goes, things are more important or less
fluid.
important. But those are the things that guide me. They're my North Star. When things get noisy, I kind of distill it down to a short list of things that I can remember, and I can't even remember all of them. So there you go.
Well, I can't either, especially if somebody puts me on the spot. I can't even hardly spell my name if somebody puts me on the spot. So, and then so you've got you tell us just really quickly. You involved in a couple of different nonprofits for veterans initiatives.
That's right. Yeah, I most recently and still currently a board member of a nonprofit called Project One Veteran at a Time, Project OVAT. We are a nonprofit that focuses on helping veterans with their VA disability claims. We could spend a whole bunch of time talking about why that is necessary, but the VA is a government bureaucracy that is often hard to navigate and oftentimes make bad decisions. And so we exist to help veterans get the benefits that they deserve and have earned. I'm obviously, for obvious reasons, pretty passionate about veterans because those people are my family. And so, that one was founded by a very dear friend of mine, Will Markham. We call him Calvin Markham, Silver Star recipient, first airman in Afghanistan in October of 2001. And his VA journey is the reason why Project OVAT exists. Guy that by all means should be getting everything that he should be getting, and the VA did him wrong. So that's why we exist.
Makes me irate, especially considering, we're paying the Taliban and the victims' families millions of dollars for their loss that we can't even take care of.
Yeah, well, people I don't believe that the VA are they're not. They're well-meaning people, right? They really are. It's a big bureaucracy that sometimes just requires some help navigating. They want to do the right thing. They want to help. Their customer, who's the veteran. Oftentimes the bureaucracy gets in the way of that, but we've got experts that are well versed in, the medical claims and the legal side of that, and we can help those veterans. But we're early stage. We've helped 100 and give it or take 180 veterans with their VA. We call it compensation and pension. Will Martin is very adamant that we don't call it disability because we're not disabled. This is compensation and pension that people have earned and deserve. But they're well-meaning people in the VA. They just they have a hard time doing what's right for their constituents. So that's why we exist. If they would do that, we wouldn't have a need to exist. Yeah.
And just to clarify, I want to make sure I wasn't speaking directly about the VA.
I'm with you though. I agree.
We not a whole lot of attention has been focused or resources or funds or energy on making absolutely certain that our veterans are taken care of. And so I applaud you for being involved with that. So look, as we wrap up, I'm curious if you were able to jump in a time machine and go talk to the young snot-nosed second lieutenant Bill, knowing what you know now,
Yeah.
what would you tell him, if anything? If anything, what would you tell him?
Don't forget where you came from, right? It's easy over a long career to forget that, I grew up a relatively lower middle class kid in northwestern Indiana, two teachers, right? And I try to remind myself of that, but I lose sight of it every now and then, especially having some success and end up talking to folks like you. I mean, 25 years ago, I would never thought that. I certainly didn't think I'd be on any podcast didn't exist back then, but I didn't think I'd be on a podcast.
No, but I'm with
I
you.
didn't think I'd be a CEO. So I didn't even know what that was. So I just say, don't forget where you came from.
Well, you have been consistently humble from the beginning about not believing the hype, not forgetting where you come from, and that is an admirable quality that's rare these days. So I like to make sure to point it out whenever I'm fortunate enough to come across somebody that has a little bit. So
I appreciate it. I love what you're doing. You've had some great folks on here. I'm honored to be part of that. Frankly, I don't believe I belong in that league. Some of those folks are pretty heavy hitters, but
Oh, please. Look, as are you. Look, I'm the one that's appreciative. This is exactly what I'm hoping to be able to do with this podcast, which
awesome.
is, somebody exactly like you that made it all the way to the top, right? That continuously proved people wrong, broke boundaries, and then gets to share, like you did, the good and the bad, the lessons that you learned. And look, my hope is that there's somebody out there that may be working on an acquisition integration or an IT project that hears this story and may hear the part about where you lost a little bit of sight over who the customer was, and ask themselves, wait a minute, who's my customer? And can take some value out of this. So thank you for all that you shared. I very much appreciate it. And there's a lot of people that are going to get a lot out of this. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it. It was
you got
great.
It, Bill.
Oh my gosh, hour and a half. It went
I know.
quick.
I know. Thank you. I apologize for going over, but I just couldn't stop.
Been great. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk soon. Take care, Bill.
Take care.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.